Hello and happy holidays. It is almost Thanksgiving, so I decided to compile all my favorite Thanksgiving dinner recipes into one video. So if you still don't know what you're making for Thanksgiving, this video is for you. I will also leave links to all the recipes in this video in the description below in case you want to follow along. There will also be timestamps in case you want to skip to a particular recipe. This recipe is hands down my most popular holiday recipe, which is my lentil loaf. It is a beautiful centerpiece for your holiday table, and it is also delicious. I make it for every holiday dinner, and I've already made it once this fall, so let's go ahead and get into that recipe now. We're gonna start by preparing the lentils. I'm using 1 cup of dry green lentils. So I'm gonna rinse them off and then cook them for 5 minutes longer than the package recommends. We want the lentils to be really tender for this recipe. While that's cooking, I'm gonna preheat my oven to 350 degrees, and I'm also gonna line my loaf pan with parchment paper. I'm using a 9 by 5 inch loaf pan, and this recipe will fill the whole pan. So if you're using a smaller pan, check the notes at the bottom of the recipe. I do have some conversions there. So I'm gonna put 1 piece of parchment paper going each direction in the pan, and I'm gonna leave some hanging over the edges, so that way I'll have some handles to remove the loaf when it's finished. I'm also gonna make a flax egg, which is going to help bind the loaf together so it doesn't fall apart. So I'm just gonna mix a 1/4 cup of ground flaxseed with 1/2 cup of water, and then I will set it aside to thicken. Now, over on the stove, I'm gonna cook some vegetables. I'm heating my pan over medium heat with some olive oil, and I'm gonna add a finely chopped medium onion and 3 cloves of minced garlic. When you're chopping all your vegetables, make sure they're finely chopped. Otherwise, if the pieces are too big, it's gonna be harder for the loaf to hold together. Cook the onion and the garlic for about 5 to 7 minutes, less or more depending on whether you'd like the onion to be soft or a little bit crunchier. Now I'm gonna add 1 cup of chopped celery, 1 cup of peeled and grated carrots, and a 1/4 cup of raisins. If you're not a big fan of raisins, feel free to leave them out. It's not a big deal. So this is just gonna cook for another 3 minutes, and then I'll remove it from the heat. My lentils are cooked, so I'm going to drain them, and I'll put them in a large bowl to mash them. I'm not gonna mash them, fully entirely into a paste. I do wanna keep some of the whole lentils intact, so mash them sort of halfway. I have some finely chopped pineapple here, and I'm just gonna use my fingers to really mash it up. A lot of people have questioned my sanity for putting pineapple in a lentil loaf, but it does add a really nice but subtle flavor to the loaf, and most importantly, it helps with the tender texture. It's really my secret ingredient in this loaf. Anyway, I'm gonna set aside 1/2 cup of the mashed pineapple, and I'm also gonna reserve the leftover juice for the glaze later on. All right, now I'm gonna make my seasoning paste, which is going to give the loaf a lot of flavor. So in my bowl, I'm gonna add 1.5 tablespoons of ketchup, 1/2 tablespoon of low sodium soy sauce, 1/2 tablespoon of vegan Worcestershire sauce, which I can never say properly, 1 teaspoon each of dried thyme and dried oregano, 2 tablespoons of nutritional yeast, 1.25 teaspoons of salt, and 1/2 teaspoon of black pepper. And I'll just mix that up into a nice paste, and then I'll take my flax egg and mix that into the paste. All right, now we can mix up everything for the loaf batter. So in my bowl with the lentils, I'm gonna add my cooked veggies, my pineapple pieces, 1/2 cup of rolled oats, 1/2 cup of oat flour, and my seasoning paste with the flax egg. So I'm gonna mix that well so that everything is evenly distributed. If you want, you can taste the mix here to see if it needs any additional seasonings. Just try to stick to dry seasonings, because if you add too much liquid, it could prevent the loaf from holding together. And all of this is going to go into my loaf pan, and I'm gonna press it in so it's nice and flat on top. The only thing left to do now is make the glaze, and fortunately that is super easy. So I have my bowl here, and I'm gonna add 3 tablespoons of ketchup, a tablespoon of maple syrup, 1/2 tablespoon of my pineapple juice left over from the pineapple, 1 teaspoon of balsamic vinegar, and 1 teaspoon of low sodium soy sauce. And I'll just mix that up until it's nice and even. If you want to make this a day in advance, you can stop here and refrigerate the loaf and the glaze separately, and then take it out an hour before you're ready to bake it. But since I am obviously going to make this now, I am going to glaze the loaf now. You could use a spoon or a basting brush to spread the glaze over the top of the loaf, and then just bake it for 50 to 55 minutes. If you use the make ahead option, you might need to add 5 or 10 minutes to your baking time if your loaf was still cool when you put it in the oven. Once it's baked, you really have to let this one cool properly to make sure it holds together. So let it cool in the pan for 15 minutes, then use your handles to transfer it to a wire rack and let it cool for another 30 minutes. And we're done. It's so good. This loaf is just the perfect centerpiece for your holiday dinners. It goes well with just so many other holiday sides like your mashed potatoes, your green bean casserole, whatever else you're having for the holidays. It just works. Okay, so our next recipe is a Thanksgiving classic, which is green bean casserole. This recipe is so good because it's made with all fresh ingredients, nothing is canned, and let me tell you, it makes all the difference. So let's get into it. So the first thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna grease my casserole dish, and I'm gonna preheat the oven to 350 degrees. I have 1.5 pounds of green beans here. This is 2 12-ounce bags. And I'm just going to wash them, trim the edges, and then cut them into 1.5-inch pieces. Now I'm going to take my green beans and blanch them. This is an optional step, you don't have to do it, but it will soften your green beans a little bit, and it will also help them maintain their nice green color after they've been baked. So over on the stove, I'm boiling some water in a saucepan. And I'm just gonna add the green beans and let them boil for 5 minutes. We don't wanna overcook them here because we don't want them to get too soft in the oven. Once the 5 minutes is up, I'm just transferring them over to an ice water bath so they'll stop cooking right away. I'm also gonna take 1 large onion and slice it, and then cut the slices into quarters. Then I'll saute that with some coconut oil over medium heat until the onions are just starting to turn brown, which should take about 8 to 10 minutes. Then I'm gonna add in an 8-ounce container of sliced baby Bella mushrooms. You wanna wash these first, make sure that there's no dirt on them, and just continue to cook that together until the juices from the mushrooms have been reduced. So it should be about another 6 to 8 minutes. So now everything is just about ready. I just need to make my cashew cream sauce. I have 1 cup of cashews here that I have already soaked. They just need to be soaked in water for 2 hours, or you can also boil them for 10 minutes, but you can skip the soaking if you have a high-powered blender. I'm just gonna add my cashews to my blender along with 1.5 cups of low-sodium vegetable broth, 1 3/4 teaspoons of low sodium soy sauce, or you can also use coconut aminos, 2 tablespoons of nutritional yeast, a teaspoon of salt, and 1/2 teaspoon of black pepper. And I'll just blend that up until it's nice and creamy. Okay, so let's put this casserole together. I'm gonna start with my onions and mushrooms. I'm just gonna spread them out across the bottom of the pan. Then I will put my green beans on top of that, just trying to get everything as even as possible. And finally, I will spread the cashew sauce over all of that. And then I'm just gonna take a wooden spoon, mix everything up. I wanna make sure that all the vegetables are coated with the cashew sauce. And now we bake. I'm gonna put this in the oven for 35 minutes, and then I'll pull it out just to add 1 1/4 cups of crispy fried onions, and I'll pop it back in for 5 minutes longer. And we're done. This is so good. This vegan version is so much better than the original, for me personally anyway, because everything is fresh. It's made with fresh green beans, fresh cashew cream, no canned anything, and it just makes all the difference. This next recipe is a favorite among vegans and non-vegans alike. It is my butternut squash casserole. This dish is so loaded with flavor, but it is delicious too. So here is that recipe. The first thing that we need to do is roast our butternut squash. So I'm gonna preheat the oven to 400 degrees Fahrenheit, and I'm going to prepare a baking tray with some parchment paper. I'm also gonna get out my casserole dish and spray it with some oil. So I have a medium-sized butternut squash. It's almost 3 pounds, not quite. And I am just going to peel it and chop it into cubes that are about 1 inch in size. Then I'm going to put those in a large bowl and toss them with 3 cloves of minced garlic, half a cup of chopped fresh parsley, a tablespoon of olive oil, a teaspoon of salt, and half a teaspoon of black pepper. All of that is going to get spread on the baking sheet, and then I will bake it for about 35 minutes until the squash is fork tender. After it's done, make sure you reduce the oven temperature to 375 degrees Fahrenheit. In the meantime, I'm going to start cooking my leeks over on the stove. I have 4 smallish leeks here. Once I slice them up, we'll see if it's the right amount. So we are only using the white parts of the leeks, so I'll start by cutting off the green tops, and then I'll cut the roots off of the bottom. And I'm gonna just slice the leeks in half so I can wash in between the layers. Typically there's a lot of dirt and sand in between the layers, so I found that slicing them in half is the best way to clean them. Once they're clean, we're just gonna slice them into smaller pieces. You're gonna wanna end up with about 4 cups of leeks. So I have a large saute pan here, and I'm just gonna add 1.5 tablespoons of olive oil and heat it up over medium heat. Then I will add my chopped leeks to the pan, along with a tablespoon of fresh thyme, half a teaspoon of salt, and 1/4 teaspoon of black pepper. And you just want to cook that until the leeks are tender, which should take about 10 minutes. So now we're also going to make a cashew cream. So if you don't have a high power blender, if you have an old one like mine, then you're going to want to pre-soak your cashews. So you can either soak them in water for 2 hours, or you can just boil them for 10 minutes. So you're going to take 1/3 of a cup of cashews and 2/3 of a cup of water, blend it up till it's nice and creamy. And then you're just going to add 1.5 tablespoons of nutritional yeast for a little bit of nice cheesy flavor. I'm also going to make a flax egg to help bind everything together a bit. So that's 2 tablespoons of ground flaxseed with 1/4 cup of water. And we'll just need to let that sit for about 5 minutes to thicken up, and then we'll mix it into the cashew cream along with 1/4 cup of breadcrumbs. So now we're almost done. I'm just going to add my butternut squash, leeks, and cashew cream sauce into the baking dish and mix it up a little bit, and then put it in the oven for about 15 minutes. While that's baking, I'm going to chop half of a cup of pecans, and I'm going to set aside 1.5 cups of chopped green kale for the top of the casserole. Now that the 15 minutes are up, let's finish this dish off. I have some tree-line sea salt and pepper cashew cheese. This cheese is absolutely amazing. It tastes very similar to goat cheese, and it goes amazingly well with the butternut squash. So I just want to add this so that it is a little bit crumbly. I'm not adding the whole thing. I'm only adding about 2/3 of it. So I am going to use a fork to kind of break it up and add it in. And I'll add 1.5 cups of chopped kale as well, and then I'll just mix it up a bit to get the kale and cashew cheese nicely distributed. And then I'm just taking my pecans and sprinkling them on top here before I put everything back in the oven for another 10 minutes. And we are done. This one is a bit of work, as you can tell, but it is so worth it. This is one of those recipes that just feels super indulgent, but it's actually pretty healthy. There's so much good stuff in here and it tastes amazing. Last up, I personally think no holiday dinner table is complete without mashed potatoes. For this recipe, I used Kite Hill sour cream and chives to really amp up the flavor. This is a really easy recipe, so let's check it out. So for this recipe, you're gonna need 3 pounds of potatoes. I am using Yukon Gold, which I really love because they have this creamy, rich flavor that's delicious. But you can also use russet potatoes if you prefer those. And I am using Kite Hill vegan sour cream, which is the one that I recommend. I have tried a couple of others, and honestly, this one is just absolutely the best. Like, it is spot on with its taste and texture. And we're also going to need some plain unsweetened almond milk, vegan butter, chives, and salt and pepper. So let's get started. The first thing we need to do is peel and chop the potatoes into 1-inch pieces. So by cutting the potatoes into small pieces, what we're doing is enabling them to cook a little bit faster when we boil them, which coincidentally is the next step. So I'm going to put my potatoes into a large saucepan and cover them with water. And I'm just going to turn the heat up and let them boil for about 15 minutes or until they're fork tender. Once they're soft, we're just going to drain the water out and return the potatoes back to the pot. I actually like to save my water for my potted herbs because they seem to really like my leftover cooking water. And I am just taking a potato masher and mashing the potatoes up until they're nice and soft. And I'm adding in 1/2 cup of the vegan sour cream and 3 tablespoons of vegan butter as I continue to mash. Eventually you should have a nice creamy texture. I'll also add some salt and pepper to taste here, and you can add some more sour cream or vegan butter if you want to. Now I'm just going to add some of my almond milk. This is optional, but it will give you an even creamier texture. So I am starting with 1/4 cup, and you can add up to 1/2 cup of the almond milk until you reach the texture that you want. So we're basically done here. I have transferred the potatoes into these 2 bowls. I couldn't find my bigger bowls, so I've got 2 smaller bowls. What are you gonna do? Anyway, all we have to do now is just mix some chives in there. I have 1/4 cup of chopped chives here, and we're gonna take 3 tablespoons, so about 3/4 of that, and mix it in. The other tablespoon is going to be reserved for garnish on the top. This is so good. Alright, well that was the last one for this video, but if you still need more ideas for Thanksgiving sides or desserts, don't worry, I've got you. In the next couple of days, I've got 2 more videos coming out, so make sure you subscribe if you want to catch those. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.